Rehab to Performance. I'm super excited about it finally being out. 2 years in the making, which is insane. I did not anticipate it taking that long. When people said it was going to like take every ounce of energy I had to write a book, I should have listened. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm really glad that it's out, and I'm really glad that people are able to start to look at it and provide some feedback. And yeah, so the whole reason I wanted to write the book was to really provide people with an organizational system for which everything that they already know fits within. Because I didn't want to recreate the wheel, right? Like, I feel like there's so much stuff out there. There's so many awesome things that people are doing. And if there was one proper way to do it, we would all be doing it, right? But there's not. What we do is such an art based on science. And I wanted to make sure that everybody's art was able to fit within a scientific framework and within an organizational system that could really continue to help their athletes. So for me, that's really what the book Bridging the Gap from Rehab to Performance is about. It's about an organizational system from which everything that you already know and everything you do fits within. And hopefully what it does is it highlights some areas that maybe you can explore further with either continuing education, or that you can explore further with relationships, right? And sort of creating relationships with other clinicians, other strength and conditioning professionals, other people that can sort of help you bridge the gap, because no one can do every single thing from the operating room to trying to help somebody locate a fastball on the mound, right? And all the steps in between. So we have to absolutely create a network of people that we work together. So really that's what the book is about. And I knew the second I wrote it, one of the hardest things about writing a book is that every edit you get back, you keep adding and you keep adding and you keep adding. And if you do that, the book never comes out, right? Like, you just continue to add more and more material to it. And so I was just getting to the point where I was like, okay, the book needs to go out, it needs to be published, but I want it to be a living, breathing thing, right? And so what I want to do is create a whole bunch of online continuing education for people that will supplement the book. And like, the book would sort of be like the textbook for all of the stuff that we're going to be doing online. But one of the main points of this webinar, and I want to talk a little bit more about obviously what's in the book and kind of talk about the organizational system, but the main point of this webinar is that I want your feedback. So what I need from you guys, if you haven't already, to go to SueFalsone.com and download a free preview of the book. It's going to give you part of the first chapter, which hopefully you enjoy. After you read that, and after you get the book and you kind of look at the book, what I want to know is what you guys need from me. What is it about bridging the gap? What is it about the concept of bridging the gap from rehab to performance that keeps you up at night? Like, I know the things that keep me up at night. I know the things that that really sort of eat away at me when it comes to rehabilitating and returning my athletes to performance. But I want to know what keeps you guys up at night. And hopefully those are the educational opportunities that I can provide for you guys moving forward. So I don't want to put out the content that I want to put out. I want to put the content out that you guys want. So hopefully you guys can send emails or just respond on here. And really kind of give me some direction as far as where you want me to take the educational content from the book moving forward, because I wanted to live and breathe in videos and in webinars and online, because the book, obviously it is what it is. It's done and it's in print, and that's not going to change, but I want it to be a living, breathing thing. And the best way to do that is with video and webinars and stuff like this, and online content. So that's really the whole point, Doc. That was a really long explanation. But.
No, but that's great. That's awesome. And you know what, everyone? We're going to put a sticky message right now in the chat. But guys, let us know what you're struggling with, because that allows the content to be really engaging. It's going to be a lot smoother. You're going to see everything work, but you're going to have this, and it's going to be geared towards you. So I'll make sure that I put that as a message in the chat. Please take the time to do this. And Sue, we'd love to hear about the organization of the book as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to open up here to page 253. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that chart. And this is really what the entire book is based off of. And so for me, there's a very specific system that is required in order to return an athlete to play. And it's not necessarily a continuum per se, because you can certainly work on one part of the organizational system before or after, making sure that you have a good understanding of what tissue is the issue. It matters if someone is dealing with a rotator cuff bursitis or if they're dealing with a rotator cuff tendinopathy, right? Because your intervention can irritate a bursitis, right? Like let's say I choose cross friction massage. So if I do cross friction to a bursa that is inflamed, I'm going to irritate the bursa. But if I do cross friction work to a tendinopathy, I can potentially help lay down collagen in the appropriate way and kind of help with that scar. So my intervention is affected by the tissue that is the issue. And if I choose the wrong intervention for the wrong tissue pathology, I could potentially be causing more harm and more pain and more inflammation. So in the beginning, identifying the pain generator matters. So that's the first portion of the book is talking about pain and the pain generator. As we move forward, we start looking at the entire motion segment. So we need to be able to identify within the motion segment how the pain generator is affecting the entire segment. So for example, I think I give the example in the book where I had a baseball player who had dislocated his elbow, and the elbow ended up being the least of our worries. He had dislocated it in a really traumatic fashion. So anytime he reached his arm away from his body, he would get extremely apprehensive because he was nervous about redislocating, even though everything was surgically fixed. So what ended up happening was we ended up with a huge shoulder problem because he wouldn't move his arm away from his body. So his shoulder really became part of the motion segment that we had to focus on. And so it wasn't just his elbow, which was the pain generator. That's where his pain was coming from. But now we had to incorporate all of his shoulder stuff and his wrist and hand stuff to make sure that the entire motion segment was working together. So it's important to look at that entire kinetic link. Then as we move forward, it's all about psychomotor control. And so making sure that the right muscle is firing at the right time. So making sure that agonists are being agonists, synergists are being synergists, prime movers are being prime movers, and stabilizers are being stabilizers. When a stabilizer has to become a prime mover due to compensation, the body gets really angry. If the body has to utilize a prime mover as a stabilizer, again, the body gets really angry. So we have to let muscles do their job. So then once we're sort of establishing that psychomotor control, we move on to my favorite chapter, I think, of the book, which is somatosensory control. And somatosensory control is all about really neurology, right? It's called the sensory motor system for a reason. And that was my post today for Treatment Tuesday, was about the sensory motor system. I've spent 2 decades of my life trying to alter people's motor output. And the last 2 years, I've really focused way more on altering people's sensory input. If you change sensory input, you are going to absolutely change motor output. And so it's called the sensory motor system for a reason. The sensory motor system that really play a huge role on how people move. And then as we move forward, we kind of move into fundamental performance. And fundamental performance is all about having fundamental strength in order to be expressed as power. So people have to have, for you clinicians, we have to have 5 out of 5 strength to make sure that every muscle is as strong as it possibly can be. For strength coaches and personal trainers, that's really just kind of a clinical strengthening thing, meaning that you're able to resist against gravity and against external force without issue is basically what it means. But you just really need to have solid foundational strength so that way we can express it as power, because that's really what an athlete needs, right? An athlete needs to be able to be powerful and express that strength over a given period of time, and they need to be able to do that repeatedly. So that's where fundamental performance comes in. Then we have fundamental advancement, which is really where all of our athletic movement comes in. So linear movement, multi-directional movement, jumping, landing, deceleration, all of these things that sort of make up fundamental athletic movement are so important. So that way, when people get to the final stage, which is advanced performance, that's really where it matters what type of an athlete they are, right? So a baseball player and a football player both need to run, but a baseball player runs very differently than a football player, right? Or than a soccer player or whatever. Everybody needs to run, but they need to do it differently based on the sport that they are. And even if they're in the same sport, the different positions, right? So an offensive lineman moves way differently than a wide receiver does. So it's that final category where it really comes into play as far as the athlete specific model. So just sort of summarize that, in the beginning, things are very diagnosis specific, meaning it matters, right? I think in this day and age of functional training, we tend to spend too much time sort of in the middle portion. Because in the beginning, things need to be really diagnosis specific. It matters if you have a lumbar disc herniation or if you have a spondylolisthesis. Those are two very different things when you're in the beginning stages of rehab, and they need to be treated differently. Whereas we move through the continuum, things become really diagnosis inclusive, meaning everybody gets core stability, right? It doesn't matter what type of pathology you have. Everybody on this thread is probably doing some type of core stability for their back pain patients, because in the middle, things are really diagnosis inclusive. And then as we move down towards the end of the spectrum, more towards the performance side of the house, things are really client specific, meaning it matters if they're a baseball player or a football player. So we move through this continuum of diagnosis specific to diagnosis inclusive to client specific for our interventions. And underlying the entire thing, which we talk about in the book too, is the biopsychosocial aspects of injury and of pain. Because when people are, as we know, this chart says in the book, Appendix 1, and that's really what the entire book is about. And it just gets into more detail on all of those things. And again, like, this is what I want to create online content for you guys, is to sort of expand more on those concepts.
That's awesome. And Sue, that was awesome, because that chart, it's jam-packed. And did you even go in depth with all of the sections of that one image, or was that just the surface, really?
Yeah, that was pretty much, pretty much the surface, right? Like, just sort of a general overview of the organization of the book. And I feel like the other thing that the book for me really does two things. One is it helps me sort of organize my system of returning an athlete to play and bridging that gap from rehab to performance. The other thing that it does is that it allows the clinician or the strength coach. So as you're sort of looking at this chart, which I don't know, you're probably reading it backwards, but like, let's
we got it. We
got
can
it.
see
We're
it.
good. You can read it. So, for example, if you're a physical therapist, right, and you spend most of your time down here in this diagnosis-specific area, so you're really working on either explore some of those more sport performance-related aspect of things, or you need to befriend somebody who does know those things, right? And so if you don't have the ability in your practice to sort of explore the entire continuum, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or that it doesn't have to happen for your athlete. It means that you have to create relationships within your community in order to bridge the gap from rehab to performance. So it sort of allows the person to kind of look at that chart and say, okay, here's where I have focused my entire career on. So maybe my next Con Ed class is going to be in a different space, or who do I need to make friends with in my community so I can better bridge the gap from rehab to performance?
Yeah. What's interesting, Sue, you've got about 76% of your audience athletic trainers we've got in the house right now. I thought it was going to be more PTs. I thought it was going to be more physical therapists. This is great. So you mentioned where the physical therapists were laying. What about the athletic trainer? Where would they be on that chart? What would they need to know?
Well, yeah, I think everybody's different, right? So with the way the book is organized, I think that the athletic trainer and the physical therapist are people who probably are going to really sort of understand the beginning portion of the book really well. And the strength coaches are going to understand the ending portion of the book really well. And so what I tried to do was write it so the strength coach would really appreciate and want to buy the book and want to read the book in order to understand more of the injury type stuff and of the pain. And so that the clinician, the physical therapist, and the athletic trainer would really look to the book to sort of understand more the performance aspects of the house. So what I had to do was really sort of keep the same voice throughout the book, but yet kind of really make it so, I mean, a strength coach probably isn't going to buy my book to learn about Olympic lifting, but a physical therapist or an athletic trainer might look at the book in order to start to understand the basics of Olympic lifting. Just like a strength coach or a physical therapist may not want to look at the book to sort of talk about evaluation, but they might want to look more at the book to get a better understanding of acceleration mechanics. So it sort of is flipped, I feel like. I feel like the strength and conditioning and personal trainers are going to enjoy the beginning portion of the book, and that the physical therapists and athletic trainers are going to want the end of the book. And so what my hope really, though, is to bridge that gap between the two, because that's the whole point, right? Rehab doesn't end one day and performance begin the next. It's one big long continuum. So hopefully everybody enjoys the entire thing for sure.
Excellent. One last thing before we go, Sue, could you explain how you felt at the beginning of this process, writing this book, and at the end, what have you learned as you've had to write this book?
Yeah, I learned a lot about myself. It was a really, it's a tough thing, right? Because as you're putting your thoughts down on paper, everything seems extremely clear to you. And I would send it to Larry Draper. Larry's my editor at OTP Books, and she is unbelievable. She's absolutely stellar, absolutely unbelievable. And yeah, she really, really challenged me. And so I would put these thoughts down on paper and send it to her and think it was like the best thing ever written. And she would write back and say, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. This takes over the book. You need to expand here. You need to delete some of this. And it was really, really hard. It was really hard to hear that feedback because I thought I was being as clear as possible, right? I'm like, how does she not understand this? And then I went back and would read it. I'm like, oh yeah, this needs more detail, or I'm assuming a lot of things here. And so I think we all have our own thought process and our own way that we approach our patient and our clients. But yet when you have to put that process down on paper, it makes you really, really honest about what you actually do and how you don't have the ability to skip a step, right? And so it made me really fill in the blanks of what I did and how I was doing it and how I organized my thoughts and how I really progressed an athlete. So it was a long process. It was an interesting process. I'm super relieved that it's over and that it's just out and that now we can just talk about it and talk about the content, because that's what I'm passionate about, right? I'm passionate about the content, or I wouldn't have written it. So I'm just really excited to kind of get the conversation going, which is what today is really about. I just really want to sort of hear from people as far as what they want to hear from next. And Craig, I see that you're if you don't have the chart, so if you go to the SueFalsone.com and download the free preview, it's in the free preview, so you'll be able to get to see that if you haven't done it yet.
Yeah. And by the way, Sue, people have been giving you, I'm not sure if you've seen, there's actually a section with polls that show what people are interested. So really a lot of people are interested in seeing your techniques, how you have done it, but also a lot with your case studies and application of it. So this is really good feedback. I've already put up 3 polls and people are just going crazy with it. So thank you so much.
Cool.
But this is really good stuff. So this is really going to dictate the flow of material, but this is awesome that you guys are so active in wanting to see this. So before we go, Sue, do you want to let the good people where they can find you, keep up with all of your information, all that stuff, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not very creative with my social media handles. You can pretty much find me Sue Falsone on Twitter, at Sue Falsone on Twitter, at Sue Falsone on Instagram and on Facebook. And then the company Structure and Function Education, I think we're SF Dry Needling on Twitter, but Structure and Function Education as well. So we're going to be kind of blending, bridging the gap within Structure and Function Education. So right now, Structure and Function Education is a dry needling education company, but we're obviously going to be expanding as we move forward. So really kind of looking forward to that.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here. First time getting out all of the kinks and everything. So thank you for being here and staying with us and staying so engaged. And we'll be back very soon with more material. And thank you so much, Sue, for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience.
Bye.
Bye.